Hrvoje, čuješ me? Hrvoje, čuješ me? Čuješ me? Bok.
No, mahati na nas vidi.
Ne, samo mene.
On vidi sebe.
Ne, vidi tebe, jer je tu kamera.
Točno.
Znači, onaj tamo put što je u desnom, to je što kamera snima.
Da. Evo, krećete kameru za diskusiju.
Zdravo svima.
Jer se može kamera okretati.
Ja sam je ovako okretao, samo medneš i kameru, kreneš iz primanje. Bravo, kad je diskusija.
Da. Od Ivane. Znači, Ivana je... Ivana, znači, sjedi Ivana, jer vidio sam sjedi i sve to snimati.
Dobro.
Ivana, monter. Znači, gospodinu u propisu šiti. Treba šiti fluid. Znači, treba mu stik. Jer bi trebao...
Tako je ću nešto sitno i raditi. Dobro, super.
Stik. Ali ona je došla s nama.
Evo, dobio sam stik.
Ok, bravo.
Čekaj, kako taj, mora ga istrniti. Izveći. Evo imam stik, hvala. Sin Dijance.
Reci.
Ko je reci?
Nećeš to reći?
Ne.
No, one prekorisnike su ga našli Balkans, ne znam što.
Ne, on se zove reci. Ja ne izgleda kao neko kongres.
A, evo je Aleksandar.
Novina je ono što mu Balkanu dali to.
Super.
Rekli mi što si. Da sam rekao. Ne, vidiš
Ja? Od tih sam jedan u Kratičnu. Da. U grana sam.
Ne,
Sami. Što ste radili?
Ne znam da li, ali mislio sam da smo dovoljno udaljeni jedan od drugog pa da ne moramo imati maske, ali ja...
Može.
Nekako.
Pa je epidemiolog. Ono smo dali.
Zato smo tako mjestili, da.
Znači, ja sam toliko navikao na njega, ono što je zapravo sad bitno. Možemo ovih plaćati ljudi iskoristiti dok nismo očigledno početi da čekamo Violetu. Možemo se kako možda predstaviti, mislim da više manje se svi znamo, ali idem za da zapravo neka imena nisu poznata. I ako može samo kratko, možda prvo je dopuštaš.
Pa, naravno.
Da, znači sve čekam, znaš. Znači, jel ovo čuju kolege na Zoomu?
Trebalo bi što
Da,
Preko maske, teško.
Da, bez
ne,
maske.
maska je prija.
Pa je, puno razlika.
Dobro. Znači, Igore, hoćeš reći možda da samo čekamo par sekundi, da kolege čuju da se čeka par sekundi zbog dolaska kolegica Simonove Zaničić.
Ok, dakle,
Samo da ne znaju, par sekundi čekamo.
ako, ne znam jel me čuju svi kolege koji su na Zoomu, ali
Čujemo se.
čekamo još samo malo da nam se gospođa Violeta Simeonova Staničić pridruži i onda ćemo krenuti sa programom.
Ako može, možemo se samo kratko predstaviti. Evo mogu ja krenuti, znači, gospodine Svemičnog strane, znači ja sam Goran Mato, profesor doktor sveučilišta u Zagrebu, član uprave odbora i pazi mene Ivice, hoće reći Hurka, Hur.
Dobro da nije nađe.
Lovaka Kušanin, do prije 5 godina odvjetnica, specijalizirana za ljudska prava, zadnje 5 godina suda. Ema Leto, ja sam studirala međunarodnosti i diplomacije kod profesora Šavca i profesora Vandala, danas se bavim projekt managementom i geografijom.
Ja sam Zvonimir Šikić, umirovljeni profesor matematike sa sveučilišta u Zagrebu.
Darko Hovšek, predavač profesor na antropologiji Filozofskog fakulteta u Zagrebu. Inače sam po struci filozof i sociolog.
Ivan, presli sad da znam.
Mi smo za tehničku podršku informatičari iz Osijeka.
Dobro.
Neću se vam predstaviti. Ja sam Igor Kolman, nedavno izabrani tajnik Hrvatskog Rimskog kluba i koristim priliku da vam se zahvalim na podršci u tom izboru. Po obrazovanju sam politolog, trenutno na postdiplomskom na Pravnom fakultetu sveučilišta u Zagrebu, a u jednom trenutku sam bio i zastupnik u Hrvatskom saboru i bavio sam se i odnosima s javnošću i novinarstvom. Trenutno radim u Hrvatskom saboru kao tajnik kluba zastupnika.
Dobro, ja sam Hrvat Radinić, predsjednik škole Hrvatske univerzitete kluba, a isto kao i Šikić je tadašnji profesor matematike za različne teme. Stavljali su i Igore.
Violeta Simeonova Staničić, uredar parlamenta, voditeljica od Hrvatske u 2013. godini. Tako da na neki način povest se dešavala ne samo ispred našim očima, pošto mi sad resmo na neki način snimali ured, a i ponekad i sa našim učešćem.
Evo kako, dobro se nadovezujem onda na vas. Andreja Čović-Vidović, zadužena za odnose s javnošću Europskog parlamenta u Hrvatskoj, već 8 godina od našeg ulaska u Europsku uniju. Prije toga diplomatkinja Ministarstva vanjskih poslova i europskih integracija. Prije toga također načelnica sektora za europske poslove Ministarstva financija, zatim u Ministarstvu rada. Još prije toga sam bila zadužena za međunarodne projekte Unika osiguranja u Hrvatskoj, tako da miješano sektor, znači doktorandica komparativne politike, po struci politolog i lingvist i drago mi je što ćemo se družiti na temu budućnosti Europe.
Božo Kovačević, predavač međunarodnih odnosa na sveučilištu Libertas i član upravnog odbora Foruma za vanjsku politiku.
Evo, i možda još Marko.
Dobar dan, drago da vas samo pozdravite, ja sam Marko Krnski. Pozdrav svima, dobar dan. Marko Krnski, profesor na sveučilištu Balkans.
Hvala vam svima i prije nego što krenemo na ovaj prvi službeni dio otvaranja skupa, dozvolite mi samo 3 rečenice, one nulte na svakom ovakvom skupu. Prvo vam zahvaljujem na odazivu i na dolasku, hvala vam na dobroj volji i na pomoći organizaciji ovog skupa Hrvatske udruge rimskog kluba. I naravno moramo se zahvaliti prvenstveno Ministarstvu vanjskih i europskih poslova koje nam je odozvalo financiranje ovoga skupa. Isto tako i Ministarstvu znanosti i obrazovanja koje doprinosi svojim stipendijama i naravno našim dragim partnerima u Uredu Europskog parlamenta u Zagrebu, gospođi Simonovoj Stančić i gospođi Čović-Vidović i na kraju, ali nikako najmanje važno, i našim dragim i vjernim prijateljima, partnerima i domaćinima Interuniverzitetskom centru u Dubrovniku. S time je ovaj dio zahvale i pozdrava završen i sada dajem riječ. Čast mi je dati riječ voditeljici Ureda Europskog parlamenta u Zagrebu, gospođi Simonovoj Stančić. Izvolite.
Ja kao i uvek, naravno, jako sam zahvalna što ste me pozvali, u stvari moram reći istinu da ja ne bi došla, dosta sam razmišljala o tome i Andreja, u stvari me ne govorilo koliko je to važno, koliko moramo razgovarati sa vama, hvala Bogu sada možemo izravno i na neki način da prezentiramo sve što se dešava trenutačno sa taj proces konferencije u budućnosti Europe. Tako da zahvaljujem vama, ali zahvaljujem isto i Andreji da de facto je dosta me motiviralo na nas dvoje dođemo. Ja uvek u ovakvim prilikama ne pripremam kao neki pozdravni govor, pošto stvarno moj život sada prolazi u različitim skupovima, okrugli stolove, konferenciji. Znam koliko ljudi padaju u nesvijest od 3 pozdravnih govora koji de facto se pričaju o Kristu. I sasvim najkraća verzija koju sam pripremila u stvari na neki način prezentacija što trenutačno je stanje ovog procesa konferencija u budućnosti Evrope. Da bi predlažem da na taj način stavimo neku sliku u neki okvir šta trenutačno je stanje i šta trenutačno se dešava. Institucijama Europske unije se dugo vremena predbacivalo da su previše udaljeni od građana i da funkcioniraju, ajmo reći, stvarno distancirani od evropskim građanima. Te politike oblikuju i donose birokratiju u briselskim uredima koja uopće nisu u kontaktu sa građanima. Bilo je nužno pokrenuti platformu koja će imati pozitivan učinak na evropsku integraciju i politiku i koja će pružiti priliku evropskim građankama i građanima da aktivno i izravno oblikuju budućnost Evropske unije. Moramo pomenuti par puta, kada prije toga su se pokušavali rešavati krizisna, ajmo reći, situacija u Evropskoj uniji, jedna od kojih je medicinska konferencija iz 1955. godine, Konvencija o budućnosti Evrope iz 2011. godine, koje su predstavljali na neki način povestnu prekretnicu u procesu integracije Evrope. Te su uspešno promenili dinamiku međudržavnog pregovaranja sa novim institucionalnim metodima, kao primjerice uključivanje građanima i dijalog. I tu ja moram priznati, kako ta medicinska konferencija se desila više od desetljeća prije i ja da se rodim, to jest ne bi mogla znati što se dešavalo, sam proverila i ispalo da od svog rođenja Evropska unija uvek je tražila i u krizisne situacije našla neki jako kreativni pristupi da rešava probleme. Znači, unatoč postignućima Pariškog ugovora od 1951. godinu o osnivanju Evropsku uniju i pokretanje Evropske zajednice za ugljen i čelik, Evropske upravne zajednice, Evropske zajednice koja bi se temeljila na principu zajedničkog tržišta, to nije de facto se odmah desilo, pošto negativno glasovanje u Francuskom nacionalnom skupštinu u kolovozu 1954. godinu je paraliziralo evropski škver. Tako da ta konferencija u Messina je bila možda jedan od prvih, najkreativnijih pristupa na koji su evropski čelnici od te 6 država članice koje su osnivače Evropsku uniju su uspeli naći način za napredak u izgradnju Evropsku uniju. Tako da samo sam htjela pomenuti to kao jedan primjer kako brojne krize su potresile Evropsku uniju de facto od početka pa do zadnjih godina. Kriza eurozone, migrantska kriza, Brexit, koja uvek se dovodi u pitanje jedinstvo i stabilnost Evropske unije. Zbog toga se pojavila potreba za pokretanje nove inicijative koje će se ponoviti na neki način ne samo uspeh prethodnih desetljeća, ali koje će biti prilagođeni modernim dobu. Kako se došlo do ideje za ispostavu konferenciju u budućnosti Evropi, čiji inicijator u proljeće 2019. godine bio je francuski predsjednik Emmanuel Macron, koji je na neki način našao plodno tlo u novoj Europskoj komisiji i za tu ideju se prihvatila i predsjednica Europske komisije Ursula von der Leyen. Inicijativu smo potom dalje podržali sve institucije Unije, te je trebalo biti službeno predstavljena na Dan Evrope 2020. godine. Međutim, kao i mnoge druge stvari u svim našim životima, pandemija je prolongirala pokretanje konferenciju za iduću godinu dana. Najjednostavno rečeno, što je konferencija u budućnosti Evrope? To je projekt participativne demokracije u kojem se u prvi plan stavljaju ideje i inicijative europskih građana. Sudjelovati mogu europski građanke i građani iz svih segmenta društva i svih dijelova Europske unije, pri čemu glavna uloga ili na neki način središnja uloga se ipak daje mladim ljudima, koje naravno bi morali najviše participirati u oblikovanju budućnosti Europske unije. To se na neki način istraživalo i kroz jedan posebni Eurobarometar koji u studenom prošlu godinu ispitivao isključivo mišljenje građana u budućnost Evrope. Vjerojatno je interesantno da pomenemo da od tog posebnog Eurobarometra se pokazalo kako građani Republike Hrvatske u većoj meri od prosjeka Europske unije smatraju kako je životni standard u Europskoj uniji u velikoj meri kvalitetniji, a budućnost Evrope nadprosječno vide u jačim industrijskom kapacitetu i uvodine euro u sve zemlje Europske unije. To je zbir se dosta ipak na neki način europozitivni, ako reći. U sklopu konferencije sada predstavljaju su 3 načina kako građani mogu sudjelovati u stvaranju bolje budućnosti Europske unije. Prvi način je kroz više jezične digitalne platforme koje mi de facto svakodnevno promoviramo kroz naše rada. Digitalna platforma pokrenuta je 19. travnja ove godine i kako smo se privikli već u virtualnom svijetu kroz online obliku digitalnim kontaktom okuplja građanke i građane koje mogu na taj način voditi rasprave sa svojim sugrađanima i iznositi vlastite ideje kako unaprijediti Evropu. Znam da statistika generalno zvuči suhoparno i dosadno, ali ipak najbolje kroz statistiku možemo dočarati da li ima uspjeh digitalne platforme. Trenutačno su se registrirali preko 30.000 ljudi, koji su iznijeli gotovo 9.000 ideja i predloga, koji su bili komentirani skoro 15.000 puta i kojima je dano oko 50.000 lajkova. Naravno, ova debata se provodi ne samo online, platforma održava to što posljednjih 6 mjeseci organizirano je točno 3.000 događanja u svih država članica, što znači na neki način debate, diskusije, razgovori, najviše sa studentima, mladim ljudima ili to što mi zovemo stakeholderima, koji su ukupili preko 130.000 sudionika, što uživo, što u hibridnim varijantima. Teme se podeljene u 10 kategorije i tu sad je interesantno što možda da smo očekivali da ljudi će najviše biti zabrinuti za 2 stvari, zdravlje i gospodarstvo, ali ako se pregleda sve što se dešava na platformu, mi smo to uradili, tema koja ima najviše pratitelja je europska demokracija. A korisnici digitalne platforme u toj kategoriji se iznijeli čak preko 1000 ideja i predloga od osnivane platforme. Predlozi su brojne, ali ove koje su dobili najviše lajkova i angažirali komentare su podrška transnacionalne izborne liste na europskim izborima, spuštene dohodne granice za ostvarivanje biračkog prava na europskim izborima od 18-16 godina, ali ima i takve koje su, recimo, senzitivni pitanja, kao preseljenje svih aktivnosti iz Strasburga u Brisel, iz argumenta da bi se tako uštedilo europskih porezodavaca 103 miliona eura godišnje. Nakon europske demokracije, tema broj 2 su klimatske promjene i okoliš. To beleži drugi najveći interes među sudionicima na platformi, gdje između najpopularnijih predlozi su oni koji pozivaju na brže i učinkovito postizanje zelenih ciljeva, kao što su razvijene mreže, recimo, brzih vlakova koje bi zamenili europske avionske linije i broj drugih. I tek posle toga dolazi, recimo, tema za zdravstvo, što je razumljivo, s obzirom da je poslednjih godina i pol dominantna tema u političkom i javnom diskursu. Građani iznose predloge kako izraditi Europska zdravstvena unija, kako bolje koordinirati zdravstvene sustave država članica, te kako Unija može osigurati kvalitetnu skrb potrebitima i dalje recimo ne može organizirati zajedničku kupovinu lijekova da bi se smanjio trošak europskim građanima na taj način. Posle toga tek dolazi tematsko područje obrazovanja, kultura, mladi i sport, koje nema najviše pratitelja, ali u stvari tu najviše se dešavaju uživo, te neki razgovore, debate, to što mi zovemo eventi. I skoro smo pri kraju, htjela bih bi upoznati sa nešto jako zanimljivo. Kada je reč o profilu sudionika i sudionici u tog razgovora koji je na platformu, zastupljenost dobnih skupina je raznolika, ali ipak najaktivnije osobe na platformi su u dobi između 25 i 39 godina. I tu poražavajuće, oko prilike 63% od sudionika navode da su muškarci. U razgovoru za budućnost Evropi participira tek 15% žena. Ostali su se misli izjašnjeni, ali u razgovoru, ove koje su se izjašnjili, de facto muškarci razgovaraju i planiraju budućnost Evropi. I sada, skoro na finalu, drugi način su djelovanje u sklopu konferencije, građanska participacija putem građanskih odbora. Upravo se odvija četvrto zasedanje koje će tih građanskih odbora, koje će u stvari do kraja sečnja okupiti se ukupno 12 puta. Vjerojatno znate da odbori se sastoje od 200 građani koji su potpuno nasumično, ne znam koja reč, izabrani, rekrutirani, pozvani, nisu volonteri aktivisti i uvek je bilo da trećina sudionika čine mladi. Važno je reći da na temelju doprinosa građanki i građana na digitalnoj platformi, raspravu na građanskim odborima će biti formulirane preporuke o kojima ćete raspravljati na kraju na plenarnoj skupštini konferenciji, što će biti na neki način, treći način građanske participacije. Tamo će biti zastupljeni i nacionalni parlamenti i predstavnike europskih institucija. Konačni ishod konferencije bit će predstavljen u obliku izveštaja zajedničkog predsjedništva koje će na temelju njega formulirati politike koje su na neki način formirali građanke i građane Europske unije. Moramo reći da konferencija zapravo nema precizno definiranog cilja. Konferencija je otvorena rasprava. Sve ovisi o tome hoće li građani preuzeti na neki način inicijative, stvarno sudjelovati ili ne. Ono što je važno je da ako sudjeluje značajan broj ljudi, to može natjerati institucije da daju podršku tim prioritetima koje ljudi definiraju. Ako konferencija donese opipljive rezultate, tada ćemo znati da je uspješna. Zato, barem u Europskom parlamentu, želimo da se ova konferencija postupno ispostavi kao građanski forum na kojem će se raspravlja za ono što je od interesa za građanke i građane Europske unije. Prijedlozi građana moraju postati politički prioriteti, tako da Europska unija se zaista može kretati u smjeru u koji ljudi žele. Ova konferencija može biti jako inovativan način davanja glasa ljudima. Nikada prije nije učinjeno, ali možda bi to moglo biti stvarno pokretač. Tako, tu problem.
Hvala vam, hvala za vaše doprinos. Evo i mi onda ovdje cijeli vikend razgovaramo o budućnosti Europe. Moram da sam se mrvicu posramio kad ste rekli ovu statistiku oko udjela muškaraca i žena, sam mislim se malo osvrnuo po našem dodanju, da ćemo i mi poraditi na tome za buduće skupove. Hvala vam puno još jednom i sada mi je čast dati riječ za njegovih 5 do 7 minuta našem predsjedniku Hrvatske udruge rimskog kluba, profesoru dr. Peljaču. Izvolite.
Poštovane dame i gospodo, dragi prijatelji, kolegice i kolege, ja vas pozdravljam ovdje u dvostrukoj zapravo ulozi. Prvo, kao što je spomenuo Igor, kao predsjednik Hrvatske udruge rimskog kluba, glavnog organizatora ove konferencije, ali također i u ime drugog suorganizatora uz ovaj Europskog parlamenta, drugi suorganizator je Interuniversitetski centar, čiji sam ja član izvršnog odbora, pa to, kao što znate svi, to je izuzetno važna, zapravo je izuzetno važna međunarodna institucija. Ja bi je nazvao dragulj među našim institucijama u Hrvatskoj. Ta institucija će uskoro obilježiti vrlo značajan jubilej, dakle dogodine se priprema obilježavanju 50. obljetnice osnutka i neprekidnog intenzivnog djelovanja u svim područjima znanosti, naročito društvenih i humanističkih, ali zapravo u svim područjima znanosti. Što se tiče one prve moje uloge, ja sam prije 2,5 godine prihvatio inicijativu i poziv akademika Šlausa, ne znam jednom se priključio, i prethodnog predsjednika ove udruge, kolege i prijatelja Krune Piska, koji je tu s nama od početka. Dakle, prihvatio sam taj poziv da pokušam revitalizirati Hrvatsku udrugu Rimskog kluba, čija djelatnost je tada neko vrijeme bila prilično zamrla. Ja sam to prihvatio, iako u mojim dotadašnjim aktivnostima nije bilo gotovo ničega vezanog uz glavne ciljeve i interese Rimskog kluba. Ali nadao sam se da će moje organizacijska iskustva omogućiti da nekako potaknem mlađe suradnike i da će ponovo doći do plodne aktivnosti ove udruge. Pandemija nas je prilično omela u tome i ja sam već mislio da nećemo u tome uspjeti. Međutim, srećom pojavio se, baš u vezi s ovom konferencijom, pojavio se poziv natječaj Ministarstva vanjskih i europskih poslova, na koji smo onda uspješno aplicirali, naročito zahvaljujući angažmanu kolege Gorana Bandova, a i moram spomenuti i dviju kolegica Mirjane Matešić i Ane Jerković, koji još nisu stigle, inače će biti također sudionici ove konferencije. Evo, ja nisam mislio duljiti toliko, zapravo ja se nadam i zapravo sam prilično uvjeren da će ova konferencija biti uspješna, a time i poticajna za, recimo to tako, novi uzlet Hrvatske udruge Rimskog kluba. Evo toliko.
Hvala, profesor. I sad kao naš treći govornik u ovom prvom dijelu otvaranja skupa, član Međunarodnog rimskog kluba, akademik Ivo Šlaus. Čekajte, ne čujemo vas.
Je li sada u redu? Dragi prijatelji, poštovani sudionici ove konferencije, meni je izuzetna čast da vas pozdravim u ime Rimskog kluba. Rimski klub su osnovali Aurelio Pecei i Alex King 1968. godine. Rimski klub ima otprilike 100 članova, redovitih i otprilike jedno 20 počasnih članova i taj broj manje više stoji konstantnim, pa skoro recimo tamo od početka 70-ih. Mi smo se relativno kasno tome pridružili i naš prvi član je primljen tek 1987. godine. A sad stavimo Rimski klub u kontekstu svega onoga što se događalo sredinom 20. stoljeća. Sredinom 20. stoljeća kulminirao je zapravo hladni rat, koji je onda povremeno imao i svoje prave ratove, a to je Korejski rat, Vijetnamski rat, Kubanska kriza i tako dalje. I u cijelom svijetu se zapravo o tome govorilo, a praktički nitko nije govorio o očuvanju okoliša. Bilo mi je jako čudno u to doba, kao sam bio profesor na UCLA-u, kada su moji studenti se bunili ne samo da sudjeluju u Vijetnamskom ratu, nego i na uništenje prirode. I to je bilo vrlo značajno i nakon toga zapravo je došao niz knjiga, Silent Spring, Only One Earth i tako dalje, koje su napisali, pa nazovemo ih umjetnici, književnici, politolozi i tako dalje, ukazujući zapravo kako sadašnja ekonomija i sadašnja politika uništavaju prirodni i ljudski kapital. Onda su se toj aktivnosti pridružile konačno i države, pa je 1992. godine održan ono što se zove Rio Summit, koji je rezultirao između ostaloga sa Agendom 21. To je bio samo prvi početak i onda slijedi cijeli niz aktivnosti, slijedi ono što se zove Millennium Development Goals, koji počima naravno 2000. završava i 15. konstatira uspjehe i naravno cijeli niz propuštenih prilika i nakon toga 2015. vrlo značajan događaj, Generalna skupština Ujedinjenih nacija 26.9.2015. jednoglasno donosi rezoluciju koja se zove Transform Our World ili Sustainable Development Goals ili Agenda 2030. To je vrlo značajno da prvi put oni koji stvarno imaju moć, a to su države, odlučuju se na potrebu da je vrlo nužno promijeniti postojeću paradigmu političku i ekonomsku. Transformacija se sastoji od 17 ciljeva i 169 podciljeva. Dakle, vrlo značajan dokument. Stalno se gleda kako stvari napreduju i nadali smo se da će stvari napredovati dobro. Nažalost, kao što je već Hrvoje spomenuo, pandemija odigrala svoju veliku i negativnu ulogu. U izvještaju koji je podnesen 2020, dakle nakon trećine rada na transformaciji, konstatira se zapravo da se stvari pogoršavaju, da klimatske promjene postaju sve veće, da se razina mora diže. Kad gledate slike koje su se između ostalog i danas pojavile, kako će izgledati 2050. London i mnogi gradovi Nizozemske, pa čak i Split i Zadar, onda je to zastrašujuće. To će se dogoditi ukoliko ne promijenimo značajno postojeću paradigmu. I to je apsolutno potrebno. Dapače, očekujemo oko 70 milijuna više ljudi koji će biti siromašni i gladni. Akademije su također sudjelovale u ovoj aktivnosti i jedna od značajnih uloga je upravo ona koju je imala Svjetska akademija umjetnosti i znanosti, World Academy of Art and Science, među kojima imamo mnogo članova, Hrvoje, Kruno od ovih koji su ovdje prisutni. Naravno još i Goran i Ana i tako dalje. Prema tome, ta akademija je zapravo već otprilike pred skoro 10 godina naglašavala upravo tu potrebu promjene ekonomske i političke paradigme. Bilo je vrlo lijepo, vrlo znakovito da je zapravo praktički prvi nastup Pape Franje 2015. Izdao encikliku Laudato Si, na koju je bio stimuliran razmišljanjem svetoga Franje Asiškog i da je prilikom te prezentacije zapravo, koju je, kao što je to obično daje jedan kardinal, ovdje je dao kardinal Peter Clarkson, koji je usput i on dolazio na sastanke Svjetske akademije. Onda je sa njegove desne strane bio profesor Hans Schnellbruchhuber, koji je zapravo član Rimskog kluba i naravno u ime patrijarha Bartolomea bio je Johannes Zazulis. Prema tome, važnost sačuvanja prirodnog kapitala je nešto što je na početku pontifikata ovoga pape i sada nedavno izlazi nešto na čemu mi već dugo insistiramo, a to je nešto što je usmjereno čovjeku. Kakvu god ekonomiju imamo, kakve god zakone imamo, nije čovjek radi zakona, nego je zakon radi čovjeka. I ova zadnja enciklika sada, koja je izašla nedavno, Fratelli tutti, braća svi, upravo to naglašava. To je jedini put kojim trebamo ići i sada je organizacija svih akademija svijeta, Inter-Academy Partnership, naglasila upravo potrebu da se koncentriramo na klimatske promjene i sačuvanje bioraznolikosti s jedne strane, a s druge strane naravno da se koncentriramo na očuvanje ljudskog potencijala. Nešto o čemu govori Papa, ali nešto o čemu je govorila i Svjetska akademija, a nažalost nije u Sustainable Development Goals, je apsolutna potreba da se rat eliminira. Rat nije koristan. Rat nikome ne koristi i prema tome ga treba eliminirati kao jedan od odnosa među narodima i među državama. Evo, to je ukratko ono što radi Rimski klub i ono što rade asocijacije Rimskog kluba. I ako hoćete, što ja osobno mislim da bi vrlo značajnu publikaciju Granice rasta trebalo nadograditi dodatnom publikacijom koja će biti usmjerena očuvanju ljudskog i prirodnog potencijala, napisano ne srcem kao što su ove dvije enciklike napisane, nego napisano strogim znanstvenim jezikom gdje se vidi da ovaj sustav je neodrživ i da ga treba promijeniti. Hvala vam lijepo.
Hvala akademiku Slavšu i hvala svima našima troje uvodnih govornika. Onda možemo zaista sada i službeno reći da je konferencija otvorena. Hvala vam na tom još jednom. We'll now be switching to English. All the panels tomorrow will be in Croatian. This one, our first panel tonight, the regional panel, will be held in the English language. And let me say, first of all, I apologize to our panelists for being a bit late, but I suppose we're still almost within the academic quarter. So let's say we might forgive ourselves for being a bit late. Thank you, first of all, our dear panelists, for joining us, all of you tonight. We're sorry that you could not be with us this time, but let's hope that we correct this in one of the future conferences we organize. Here with us tonight are Professor Aleksandar Zidanšek from the University of Maribor, Professor Goran Ilić from the University in Bitola, Professor Afrin Poti from the University in Pristina, and Professor Dr. Marko Savković from the Belgrade Security Forum. Professor Aleksandar Zidanšek is a professor of physics at the Faculty of Natural Sciences and Mathematics of the University of Maribor. He has a PhD and master degree in physics. And I have to stress especially one more thing. Since 2001, Professor Zidanšek is an associate member of the Club of Rome. And since 2005, he has been the president of the Slovenian Association of the Club of Rome. And since 2011, he was elected fellow of the World Academy of Art and Sciences in 2012. Professor Zidanšek, thank you for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you for your very kind introduction. First, warm greetings to Dubrovnik from Slovenia, and thank you for organizing this very necessary event. I was asked that in the next 5 minutes, I should present my view of the pressing challenges in Europe and what we can do to resolve them so that we get some regional perspective. So I will just start with, I prepared a short PowerPoint just to help us to guide the way. So as you can see, we live in the age of challenges. And these challenges are actually greater because there is a greater and greater number of people. You know, if you have 1 or 2 persons, they can kind of work things out. But if you have billions of people, then it's more difficult. If you have 8 billion people, then it gets even more difficult. So we can expect that these challenges are actually grow in magnitude and in the problematics. And what are these challenges? We all heard there is a challenge in environment. There is a challenge in sustainability. The world is not going in the direction it should go. But what did we do wrong? I mean, we know about this for many decades. Since I started, we are talking about sustainable development, about environment. We're talking about education. And obviously, we must have done something terribly wrong with education. I remember when I was like a younger physicist, I worked with physics education groups in Ljubljana, in Maribor, in US. And they had so many exciting models from physics by inquiry, Socratic method, project learning. And then if you look in the school, then most kids are actually bored or don't really like the teaching. So what happened? Where did it go wrong? Obviously, we have something to do in education because people who are in today's society are a product of the education that we provide them. So this is one huge opportunity for improvement. Then the other one is institutions. We have institutions, national, local, European, international. And how do these institutions function? I mean, they are actually a result of the people who have been educated in our system. And yes, most of them would like to do good and would require additional knowledge to do good, and also maybe a better organization of this institution, a more democratic Europe. So, for example, we had elections in Europe when was that 2 years ago. There were like 3 candidates, 3 serious, and a few more candidates for leading the commission. Then what happened was one of them was first, one was second, one was third, but then there was some overnight backroom deal and somebody else got in charge of the commission. So this doesn't seem like democracy, even though Europe should be like democratic institution. So there is a lot of room for improvement in our institutions from local to international level. The third level, which I believe is actually also crucial, is cultural level. We all know that politics is actually guided by the culture. You know, politicians will usually do anything to get elected. So if the culture will lead them in the right direction, then that's the direction they're going to go in. And this culture is actually a product of education and of institutions. So this is where I would like to spare some of my minutes today. And of course, we can do it only because we are standing on the shoulder of giants, as Newton said. I was very lucky to have spent a lot of time with both Professor Ivo Schlaus, who is here with us today, and my supervisor, Professor Robert Binsk, who was a very good friend of Ivo Schlaus, and they were both in Club of Rome and both excellent physicists. So that's where I actually got a lot of the education which I carry now to the younger generations. And the first issue I would like to talk today is about the indicators. We all talk about GDP, which measures our activity. Activity is either good or bad. It measures both and kind of mixes this together, which means that this is difficult to measure real quality of life with the GDP. So that's why also together with Professor Binz and Professor Schlaus, we have been for quite some time, about 15 years, I think, working on this happiness as a possibility to replace the indicator of GDP. So one issue is, of course, that what is happiness? Why is it important? We know since Aristotle and even earlier philosopher that happiness is important to humans. Some people even think this is the purpose of life or the most important to life. And psychologists are studying this very seriously. So Ed Diener and Martin Seligman actually made a study about 30 years ago. They said no variable is sufficient for happiness, but good social relations are necessary. So to say it in a simple way, we need good friends, good and deep friendship, and we have better chances to be happy than without it. So, and then there's also the database of happiness and lots of other variables by Ruth Venhoven in the Netherlands, which really has a lot of data. And so if you talk about the why of happiness, there is a psychologist from California of Russian origin, Sonia Lyubomirsky, who was studying where does happiness originate from, what is genetics, what is environment. And she found it like this: the genetics is about 1/2, this is approximate, 40–50% maybe. And then the other half, it cannot be directly ascribed to environment, but only about 10% goes to the environment. Everything else is actually a result of intentional activity of a human being, which means that everybody can actually improve our own happiness if they are doing proper things like maintaining good social relations, good friends, be active, move a lot, eat healthy, rest, and do something useful. So that's mainly what you need to do if you want to be happier. So if you watch in the world, there is a scale like life satisfaction. The green countries are happy, the yellow countries are not so happy, and the red are even less happy. We did some studies of correlation between the governance indicator and the happiness. So I will not go into details, but I would just like to show you some graphs, how different indicators of good governance are related to the percentage of very happy people. So as you can see, there is positive correlation, but there are cultural differences. So there are like different groups of countries. There are countries that are by default less happy, or those that are more happy. But if you look at the same cultural environment, you will see that this correlation is even stronger than the average correlation. So good governance means people are going to be happier. And also good regulatory quality, people are going to be happier. Rule of law, the same. If you live under the rule of law, people are usually happier than if they don't. Also control of corruption. So if you can manage the corruption, people are going to be happier. So in short, how would I synthesize the recommendations? The first recommendation is that we need a reform on the EU and all other levels in order to replace the bureaucracy with meritocracy. It's not enough that you create some rules and then you just follow the rules and do not think about what you can do better than these rules. You know, we have opportunities in education. So it's important that young people understand that knowledge is important, that nerds are cool, not that they are supposed to be not accepted in society, but this is something that should be actually promoted. So this is a huge opportunity. If we convince young people that people who like knowledge are cool, we are going to have a much better future. And then if you're talking about specific knowledge, so to support knowledge creation, there is a huge need to have a better, cheaper, environmentally friendly energy source, like for example, fusion. We need Manhattan 2 projects for nuclear fusion for energy. We actually have been suggesting this in European Union, in Club of Rome for many years now. We have not yet been successful. We hope we will, because this is a much better idea to speed up this fusion process so that in 10 years we could have the fusion reactors instead of waiting for 50 years when it will be too late for the current challenges. Then the other issue is this deep learning neural networks. You know, they can do wonders if you just watch how they play chess or Go, how they drive airplanes in the flight simulators, how they play computer games. They can also do useful stuff, but you need people who are going to program them, which means that already from the high school level, maybe even primary school, we need to convince young folks to kind of apply these deep learning neural networks for various challenges. And that's how you can actually solve the current environmental, social, sustainability challenges in a much more efficient and effective way that have been ever deemed possible by convincing young people to join this movement, to introduce new artificial intelligence neural network methods. And then the next issue is, of course, quantum computing and communication, which is going to be extremely important in about 10 years. And that means we need to educate young people about quantum physics, computing, communication, and allow this new civilization to take the full advantage of these technologies, which are really exciting and they're coming. So in short, I would say that knowledge and happiness and sustainability are related. We need to improve both of them, all of them. And this is my short recommendation for the future of Europe. Thank you.
Professor Zidanšek, thank you so much for kicking off our conference with this really interesting contribution and with your very interesting ideas. I guess they will also contribute to the debate later and tomorrow as well. Professor Goran Ilić is also with us here. Professor Goran Ilić is a full professor dean of the Faculty of Law at St. Clements Ohrid University in Bitola, North Macedonia. He holds a PhD in political science with a specific interest in the European Union foreign, security, and defense policy. Professor Ilić, thank you for being with us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, dear colleague. Thank you very much for the invitation to participate in this great event. So I will try to introduce some of my ideas regarding the future perspectives of the European Union, aspectuated through the European Council's elitism and parochialism, because based on my research, I concluded that one of the many problems of the current European Union design is the European Council itself. I can start from the thesis of the author John McCormick, who once said that a huge number of decisions are taken by unaccountable European bureaucrats and leaders of member states without special hearing sense for public opinion. And he talked about the European Council. According to his thesis, I developed a two-level design for examining the European Council. Certainly, I cannot present the whole study to this event, but I will try to introduce and to point out some the most important points of my opinion and my ideas about this problem. So the elitism can be sized on two levels. The first level is institutional or formal elitism, which exists in the European Union institutions, especially within the European Council as unelected body. And the second level is extra-institutional or informal elitism, which is characterized by the predominance of the strongest European Union member states and thus bypasses or ignores the institutional structure of the EU decision-making process and policy creation. Institutional elitism is most apparent in the functioning of the European Council as an institution composed of the heads of state and governments of the EU member states. The decisions adopted by the Council, as a rule, are adopted by unanimity behind closed doors, which implies a serious lack of democratic legitimacy. In this case, European Union citizens do not possess any tools for direct participation in policymaking as a democratic contribution to defining the political guidelines for European Union future development. According to famous author and Europeanist Jürgen Habermas, he stated that power slipped from the hands of the people and passed into the bodies of questionable democratic legitimacy, such as the European Council. Unlike the other EU institutions, the Council is a body or a kind of presidium composed of leaders who are not elected via pan-European elections, but through national level elections of the member states. Instead of this institution, which was for the first time institutionalized by the Lisbon Treaty, serving as the engine of EU development, he mutated into a sort of intergovernmental leviathan that quietly usurped the essence of the EU, including its values, ideals, and institutions. Therefore, I agree with Jürgen Habermas in his belief that the institutionalization of the European Council and its position as one of the central political institutions of the European Union represents an anomaly of the Lisbon system of the current European Union. The anomaly lies in the fact that the European Union has become a prisoner, the hostage, in the hands of nation states and their parochial, local, and national interests, surpassing those of the European Union. Theoretically said, this means putting forward the interests of the national states instead of the value interests of the European Union. As a notorious example of this problem, I can mention the blockage of the accession process of Macedonia by Bulgarian and previously Greek opposition in the European Council. The Republic of Greece blocked Macedonia accession due to the name dispute, while Bulgaria currently blocks Macedonian integration in the European Union due to identity issues. In this game, EU citizens and the great European design are the ones that lose. Moreover, this situation was also described by the theorist Anthony Giddens with the words, "The Union is not transparent at the highest level due to the existence of EU2, as key decisions are essentially made behind the scenes by key leaders of the states." When Giddens tackled the EU2 notion, he thinks about Germany and France. This formulation revealed the extra-institutional elitism, which is characterized by the existence of one or more dominant EU member states, which informally, through political pressure, economic blackmail, etc., create policies under the guise of European Union, which circumvent the existing EU institutions and usurp its fundamental values and ideals. Taking into account the behavior of the powerful EU member states, not only in the European Council, but also outside of it, the instrumentalization of the European Union in favor of parochial interests and the continued circumvention of EU values, in fact, paved the way for populism and illiberalism, regardless of whether it comes from left or right ideological affiliation. This is also confirmed by the author Ulrich Beck, who said that as long as we are leaving European integration in the hands of the states, Europe will not be able to come to the fore. More precisely, the central role of the European Council in the management system of the European Union is a system failed to find European solutions. European solution does not work because it refers to national interests. Macedonian case is paradigmatic case of this topic. Depending on the connotation, either pro-European or anti-European, several paradigmatic directions of future EU development can be marked, including, first of all, a loose type of union, unlike the existing one, entailing such actions as leaving the euro and focusing only on the single market. The second scenario, a union that is remodeled in a specific way, for example, the EU becoming more democratic or decentralized, which is a direction with many opportunities which are in part dependent on the national context. Then a free trade area and in line with and nothing more than NAFTA or Asian associations. Next one is one or more states to withdraw from the European Union, like Britain, based on the wishes of each the individual country, no matter what happens with the rest. Next is completion of the European Union dissolution and return to a Europe of nation states in its prehistoric or pre-existing form. And the last, not the least, Avant-Garde Europe, implying that the new EU should be based on a core and an orbit. The core will create a federation, while the orbit would will create an association. The avant-garde or core member states are supposed to be the decisive factor in promoting the integration process that will eventually culminate in a European federation. Based on that, I can conclude that the European Union is facing a serious challenge now. Each of the stated directions of development constitutes a possible scenario for its future. The main point is that the EU must return to its core values and restore its institutions to be based on them in order to make them democratic, transparent, and accountable. This especially concerns the European Council, which has evolved into a source of elitism, parochialism, and intergovernmental supremacy, making it necessary for the European Union to enter into a process of a total reinstitutionalization. This process of reinstitutionalization should entail a further supranationalization of its institutions, followed by the presence of strong democratic control and accountability of all institutions to citizens, reaffirmation of the European Union fundamental values, abolishment of the right of veto in foreign policy and related areas, maybe in tax matters, and assigning direct powers to the European Parliament, and finally, investments in unification of Europe as the ultimate goal, because we enter in the era of multipolarism, where European Union will need to compete with United States of America and China also. This can be done with revising of the Lisbon Treaty or through the adoption of a new constitutional treaty for the European Union, which would be built in these reinstitutionalization lines. However, time will tell whether the trend of a member states leaving the EU will be replaced with a trend to deepen its integration and its democratization. Thank you very much. I will not bother you anymore. Thank you very much for your patience. I try to be as short as possible, and in order to introduce more precisely my opinion about this topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I'm expecting some reactions to your intervention in the later debate. I hope we have time for that. So let's move on quickly to the next panelist in this regional and international part of our conference. With us today also Professor Avant-Garde from the University of Pristina. He works at the Department of Political Science, is a professor of international law and international relations, and also former vice rector of Pristina University. He held a PhD from the University of Hungary in Sofia on globalization as a factor of security. Professor Patti, thank you so much for being with us, and the floor is yours. There are 7 minutes.
I thank you, Mr. Coleman, very much for the invitation. It actually is my pleasure to be present and to take part and to contribute to this conference. I'll try to contribute with my short presentation, which actually will be a bit different because one can imagine a presentation coming from Kosovo must be kind of pessimistic one. Which actually will be concentrated or focused more on the current issues of EU than later on, or based on the current issues, maybe to see and to look to the perspective of EU in the future. Let me start by saying that the Western Balkans actually is the only remaining territory of Europe without being fully integrated into the European Union. Actually, there are different EU perceptions for the entire region as well as for the countries individually. Like as we heard in the previous presentation, the refusal European Union gave to Albania and the Northern Macedonia so the negative answer regarding the date of negotiations. Among the Western Balkans, among these 6 Western Balkan countries, Kosovo presents with no doubt the most complicated case of integration to the European Union, even though literally and practically both sides are repeatedly referring to the Kosovo's European perspective as only option forward. Tonight, I wanted to try to elaborate the EU perspectives from Kosovan side into twofold. The first one, Kosovo EU relations, and the second one, Kosovo's position into the region. In the first side, as regard to the EU relations, apart from the fact that Kosovo remains the most pro-European country, we have to admit that there is a huge skepticism into both sides in light of lacking the UN membership. Kosovo prioritized, or a country's priority was that toward the international recognitions, while at the EU level, still there are few countries, 5 EU countries, which are refusing to recognize the country's independence. So Spain, Greece, Romania, Slovakia, and Cyprus as EU member are blocking the normal communication with EU, even though they refer to the kind of Europeanization of the region as whole and Kosovo in particular. But how this Europeanization would look like, it is definitely difficult to be explained. In economic terms, EU together with US remain the main donor to Kosovo institutions, and people but lack of clarity in terms of the political perspective is remaining a cornerstone, keeping the process as a whole suspended. On the other side, Kosovo is the only country with no contractual relations and normal communication with EU. More than this, Kosovo remains the only country with still no visa-free regime. Especially the isolation is being considered as an extraordinary and unexplained decision. I'm mentioning these arguments in order to reflect a little bit into the Kosovo perspective or Kosovo perspective toward the future, the EU future. So you can imagine if a country is isolated and have no current perspective, then into our way forward is like a desperate model or desperate situation. It is ridiculous, especially if one takes into consideration the positive reports adopted by the European Commission, concluding that the country fulfilled all required criteria. Of course, such a decision situation is not an easy and a simple fact to the Kosovans, because as a result of this no-hope situation, there is a loss of credibility of EU, especially among youngsters. In regard to the regional position, seems that the process is somehow blocked and has no space for optimism too. 6 remaining countries from Western Balkans are not communicating normally. Apart from the repeated declarative European agenda, less can be seen and considered as progress so far. Newly promoted idea of open Balkans is accepted by half of them only. Thus, it presents a barrier toward the European integration and the European perspective in the future. Montenegro, Bosnia, and Kosovo are not on board, but they are trying at the same time to cope individually with the EU process and the EU integration because they still see the European integration as an only option forward. At the same time, Republic of Kosovo is going through a negotiation process with the Republic of Serbia, aiming the normalization of the relations between two countries, a process which is facilitated by the European Union. Seems that the new government in Pristina is lacking a clear EU agenda. And this definitely comes from the lack of EU perspective, or the other side, the negative side given by the European Union. And instead of having the clear EU agenda, the new government have set other priorities into their top of the interest. Thus, as a consequence, some late incidents are happening in northern Kosovo, in part of Kosovo, inhabited mainly by Serbian minority, and this is argumented to definitely to prove it. Under such circumstances, due to the heterogeneous position itself is having, EU is proving not to be trustful and powerful enough to lead the process, to mediate, and the close process of normalization. Since the conference is held in Croatia, I wanted to conclude with some conclusion which are linked with Croatia at the same time. Croatia, with its commitments and EU membership, from Kosovo perspective at least, is perceived as a successful story. But being as a bridge between EU and the Balkans can definitely play a crucial role. Its role can be played into two directions or into two perspectives. The first one, in supporting Western Balkan countries into their path for EU integration by sharing and promoting its practices and experiences individually with those states. And second, in lobbying and informing the EU institutions in details for the barriers and obstacles these countries face, because in my point of view, Croatia is familiar and understands those problems better than any other EU member. I stop here my word, but of course I remain here for any debate or question there might be. Thank you.
Professor Potti, thank you so much for your very interesting contribution to this conference. And our last panelist tonight in this regional and international part of the conference joins us from Belgrade. Dr. Marko Savkovic joined Belgrade Security Forum as its program director in 2014. He also directs programs of the Belgrade Fund for Political Excellence, starting with its Regional Academy for Democracy in 2013. In both organizations, his daily tasks include providing overall programmatic guidance and oversight. He obtained his PhD from the Belgrade Faculty of Political Science. Dr. Savkovic, thank you for joining us. Thank you for waiting, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, and I hope that you can all hear me well. First thing that everyone says when participating in a hybrid or virtual conference. And just a quick remark, I'm actually addressing you from Ljubljana, where I'm taking part at a workshop that is also posing the question of is the EU losing the Western Balkans, which I think is a very provocative thought. I tend to disagree still, but it was a very interesting 2 days here in actually quite close to Croatia, and in a country that's also very, I'd say, interested in what will happen with the Western Balkans European perspective. Now, I would like to thank to Croatian Association of Rome Club and of course to Goran for inviting me to take part. 7 minutes is hardly enough for a task of such magnitude, but I will do my best. And I'd like to begin listening to our colleagues by laying out several processes that are taking place at the same time right now, and that all concern this European perspective, as the euphemism goes. First is, of course, the Conference on the Future of Europe, and there are events taking place across the region. In 10 days at the Belgrade Security Forum, we will be hosting one of the panels, which is asking the question of how the Western Balkans can contribute to the ongoing debates. We've been, in a way, fighting for our place at the table. Initially, there were dilemmas whether to include Western Balkans in these discussions, and I hope that these dilemmas are now solved. What concerns us here the most, of course, is the future of the enlargement process. And not too far away from where I'm sitting right now, in Kranj, Brdo near Kranj, actually, we saw how it took 9 rounds of silent consultations before the word enlargement became part of council conclusions. And we have also read some of the first drafts and some of the first ideas that were circulated. And I have to say that some of the formulations were pretty much concerning. So it's good that the enlargement is still there. It's good that Slovenia has tried to keep Western Balkans as part of the agenda. It's good that we have a continuation of this practice where we have these European Union Western Balkan leaders summits. One of the first taking place also in Zagreb during Croatian presidency. So this practice continues, and that is definitely positive. Also, the state of enlargement has created a kind of a frustration, but also intellectual fervor, because there is now a host of ideas what to do. And your customary optimist would say that the glass is half full, because we have a number of ideas what to do next. Last week, Steven Blockmas and Milena Lazarevic published a proposal for membership in 4 stages. There is an idea being offered around by the European Stability Initiative to offer membership in single market to the Western Balkans 6 first. And this change in methodology that took place upon insistence of France heralds the possibility of candidate countries joining, participating in certain policies of the European Union, and thus drawing more funds. This is the idea of cohesion funds being open to Western Balkans as well, advocated by Dusan Reljic and a couple of other colleagues for a long time. Just to mention this as a way of comparison, if I'm not mistaken, Croatia will receive some 17 billion euros, I think, as part of the recovery funds following the pandemic. And the entire Western Balkans was, and of course, I think that we should all be grateful for this, was offered 9 billion. Also comparisons with Bulgaria and how much money this member state will receive. The scale of challenges that we are facing is such that, unfortunately, the word funding will be heard from this region for a long period of time. There is an open question: what will be of another process that's taking place, and that is the Berlin process, which is supposed to offer a framework for regional cooperation between the six, while enlargement takes a pause, if I may say so. Angela Merkel visited Belgrade and afterwards Tirana, and she made it clear that she sees Berlin process as her legacy. And she's hopeful that whoever succeeds her, and it seems that this will be Olaf Scholz, will take over Berlin process as well. And the Berlin process will continue. Common regional market was the most ambitious outcome of the Berlin process. That was in the plans and in the thinking in the Regional Cooperation Council. That was meant to be the most ambitious outcome. There are several fundamental challenges to the region in which the EU is a prime actor, and thus it is party to the future of the region. It has invested tremendous amount of funds and time, but it has benefited in return with, I would argue, the greatest resources that we all have and share, and that is our human capital. These challenges, and these are the challenges that are going to probably mark the next generation, are green transition, social inclusion, depopulation and aging, uneven economic growth, and finally, I would argue in terms of values and culture, to confirm belonging to Europe and the European Union, as opposed to some other models and ideas that are on the market or in the marketplace, if you will. In order to get there, we would need to fight against the anti-EU narrative, literally fight. I know that this sounds like a strong word, but coming from Belgrade, from Serbia, I think that I know what I'm talking about. We need to help the EU help itself in a way, to say it in a positive way. The EU could be so much better at communication, communicating, playing on its strengths. This is, of course, difficult in the Balkans, as we heard from our colleagues. The EU here depends on a number of processes. Its legitimacy is in danger. It is exposed. It is constantly questioned. And some of the opinion polls I have been reading recently are quite concerning. Over the past 5 years, you could argue that if we look at values, the EU is at risk of losing the Western Balkans. The reason why it will not lose it is simply reality of life is such that we are so interconnected that is almost unimaginable. And yet this is still a region where the EU can be successful. I mean, if there is one region in the world where the EU can be, can actually project strength and influence and show that it is still a normative, transformative, whatever you want to call it, actor, then this is the Western Balkans. However, and I'm now coming close to my conclusions, there is concern that the European Union, post-pandemic or as pandemic still, is taking place, is in a way a risk-averse, fair weather union, which is concerned, understandably, first and foremost, with the well-being of its own citizens. And there is also, and here I would definitely support or subscribe to what Professor Ilic was saying, a sociological gap when it comes to European integration. We are so focused on political processes. We are so focused on this framework, chapters versus clusters, benchmarks, and so on. And yes, European integration has remained an elite project, despite all the effort that has been invested. So what we have in effect is the lack of cultural integration, this idea that actually the people, citizens, human beings are entering this union. How these macro processes will trickle down to individuals. There is a lack of understanding how European integration affects or contributes to social change. Our societies are changing, and we need to understand European Union's role in it. And I think that as a region, we need change, perhaps a dramatic change, and we need a sort of a vision that is lacking right now. And I hope that this accumulated frustration will somehow lead us towards a kind of a breakthrough where it becomes clear that the way the Balkans, the Western Balkans, the way the six, the direction in which the six are moving right now is not good, and it goes contrary to European Union's core interest. Thank you.
Safwaj, thank you so much for your very interesting thoughts, and thanks once again to all of our panelists. We have around 12 minutes left for the debate. So I kindly ask everyone to be brief in their questions and focused in their comments and answers. And now I open the floor for discussion, both here, the real floor and the Zoom floor. And first I have Mr. Božo Kovačević.
Thank you very much. I have two questions. The first one is for Professor Zidanšek, and the second one for Professor Goran Ilic. Mr. Zidanšek, if I remember correctly, you stated that EU needs more democracy. That's one of your statements. And the other one is bureaucracy should be evolved in that direction to become meritocracy. Well, the first question is, isn't it bureaucracy a kind of meritocracy? And the second question is, it's possible to imagine, and it's possible to find a lot of examples when democracy and meritocracy are opposed to each other. So how do you think that it's possible to put together that request for more meritocracy on one side and for more democracy on the other side?
Thank you for an excellent question. These are really terms that are interconnected, and from history we can learn that whenever democracy increased, also the economy and standard of living improved and environmental conditions improved. So that is actually why I believe that increasing democracy is good for any system, particularly the European Union as well. And on the other hand, if we talk about meritocracy, we talk about people who deserve what they do. So instead of just filling the positions in European Union by some, I don't know, because the positions have always been like that, and somebody has to fill it, and then there are national quota and people just come by chance to a certain position. This is kind of stifling the development of European Union, and it would be much better if you just found the best people, the best positions, and match them together, and not go to this, we would say this bureaucracy kind of belongs to 19th century. What we need today are the teams working together for the common goal, like they do it in Google or Amazon or Elon Musk, or those the best entrepreneurs. So European Union should more or less imitate those best entrepreneurs. We are in 21st century. You know, this Western Balkan has to join European Union as soon as possible. However, the European Union has to improve, because otherwise they will want for Brexit after they join. So we need to have both them joining and also improve the European institution based on democracy and meritocracy. So that's in short my answer. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And the second question is for Goran Ilic. Well, you mentioned European Council as a problem or anomaly, and I agree with you in many respects concerning the ways of functioning European Council. But don't you think that European Council is functioning just in line with the provisions of Lisbon Treaty? If European Council would try to function in a different way, it would be against Lisbon Treaty. So, in my opinion, the main problem is Lisbon Treaty as it is now. And all authority, all power which Council has now is derived directly from Lisbon Treaty provisions.
Yes, I agree, Professor, with you. That's the point. The problem is the Lisbon Treaty institutional architecture, which is composed, if we look in the past, it is composed by the German presidency as a reform treaty in its start, with latent intentions of Germany aspirations to dominate European Union. And we also witnessed the dominant role of Germany in the past 10 years, and Angela Merkel as well. If we learn that the European Union is driven by Franco-German partnership, in the last 10 years, we're witnessing the German leadership, not Franco-German partnership. The problem is that the European Council predominantly accents its policy based on national interests of its member states, not considering or not taking into account the post-national interest of the European Union, because the European Union as a whole, as an autonomous entity, has its own objectives, goals, and interests. The European Council is one of the main breaks to the European Union integration and to the European Union ambition to establish itself as a relevant global actor with functional and democratic system. So when we talk about the future perspectives of the European Union, yes, of course, I propose a revision of the Lisbon Treaty, especially in sense of institutional architecture, in order to become more democratic, more transparent, and also controlled by the citizens. Moreover, we need to know that the citizens of the European Union has no control on European Council. They have a right to citizen initiative to the Commission to legislate via a Commission, but they do not have any right to influence the European Council policy and European Council politics. So that should be changed in the future.
Thank you so much for the questions. We now pass quickly to Andrea Čović-Vidović with her question.
Thank you. It was Andrea Čović-Vidović, Public Relations of the European Parliament in Croatia. I'll try to stay brief, although the topic is really close to my heart, both academically and professionally, so it will be hard, but I will try. So I have to add something to what Mr. Kovacic said. We have to remember there is co-decision. That's one of the crucial architectural changes that was brought upon by the Lisbon Treaty. And speaking somehow as both a bureaucrat, European bureaucrat or a Eurocrat, but also someone who works for the parliament, I see from the inside, which Violetta is perfectly aware of as well, how it has changed the dynamics of the EU, made it more complex, but also made it more of the citizens. But I will speak more on that tomorrow on the panel that we will hold. And then I'd also like to make a connection between what Mr. Zidancic said and what Mr. Sarkovic said. Mr. Zidancic mentioned knowledge leading to happiness, leading to sustainability. If we transfer this to the EU, and if we mention communications, which is something that I do professionally, and which is something that Marko Sarkovic mentioned as a, let's say, a weak point of the European Union, that's how he sees it. We work on it not being so weak. But I see a connection, you know, if you make people aware of what the EU can do for them, then you have the knowledge, then you have the happiness, and potentially leading to a deeper sustainability of the EU. So this is just a comment sort of to make it a full cycle from the beginning to the end. And then I have 3 questions, which is actually 1 question, but for 3 people. So Mr. Ilic, Mr. Hoti, and Mr. Sarkovic, a bit of futurology applied here, but by the year 2030, where do you see your countries in relation to the EU? Very briefly. Thank you. So maybe, I don't know, Mr.
Can you repeat, please, your question?
Yeah, the question is, where do you see your country in relation to the European Union by the year 2030?
Thank you very much. You know, I am devoted Europeanist. I am former vice president of Young European Federalists in Macedonia. I hope and I work in Macedonia to its aspiration in European Union. So I hope that Macedonia will start a negotiation process with the European Union. And in the near future, we will become a full member of the European Union because the Macedonian citizens deserve that. You know, we are in a very complicated situation with Bulgarian veto in European Council, with Macedonian negotiation process, and I hope that with United States support, we will overcome that obstacle because it is very interesting. Macedonia public opinion is pro-European, but European Union does not recognize that, considering its attitude towards Macedonia, with tolerating its member states to, how to say that in more polite way, when they torture Macedonia and its citizens regarding the Euro integration process, because my country has made many reforms. We all know that we are not perfect. We have many problems, but both veto from Greece and from Bulgaria were not inspired by the accomplishment of EU norms or EU standards by Macedonia, but both of them were concerned with national identity question, and Macedonia struggles in the area of identity politics 30 years. It is not fair. I understand the politics is not fair. I am doctor of political science, but the European Union needs to affect in the Balkans more ambitiously and with high level of seriousness, because Balkans as a region knows to be problematic. Moreover, we have China and Russia, And also we have some populist regimes in Balkans. We have a populist regime here in Macedonia with Nikola Gruevski government. So we know exactly how to deal with that situation. Thank you very much.
So much, Professor. Do you see Kosovo in 2030?
2030, I hope that Macedonia...
Now for the next, for Professor Hotti. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Quite similar with other colleagues. Even though I do present here a country which is back into the integration process due to this contested statehood Kosovo is facing, I do personally believe that there is the only way forward, and that's the way toward the European integration. As I already mentioned, due to these obstacles and barriers Kosovo is facing into its way toward EU, I can see, and it is visible only even if we compare, for example, last 5 years or last 10 years, the presence of other regional actors. I'm talking here for Turkey, which is investing and coming here with a capital and other live dimensions. But still, personally, I am convinced that there is the only way forward, and that's the European integration process. In 2030, yeah, hopefully member of EU, but before that, yeah, we have a lot to be done, a lot of things to solve. As I mentioned in my presentation, the normalization process with Serbia, recognition from Serbia and Bosnia and Herzegovina, then start normal communication. But I'm still optimist and believe that in 2030 we'll be member of EU.
Thank you so much, Dr. Savkovic. Where do you see Serbia in 2030?
Yes, well, this is, if I knew, I would probably be a much better paid consultant. But let's try to be, realistic, and it really depends on joint efforts by European Union and the United States. I have to subscribe to this view because we have seen whatever has been resolved in the Western Balkans, or whenever there has been an attempt to resolve an ongoing crisis or issue, this was done jointly by the EU and the US. And when I say the EU, typically there is a format, and my colleague, Professor Hotti, knows this well. This is the format of the Quint, or the format of Troika, or the format that includes the countries that have most vested interests in this region. Not all members of the EU are interested in resolving our bilateral issues. Not all members of the European Union approach them in the same way. They differ on so many aspects of the problems that we are facing. So this is, if this happens, then I can imagine that with the resolution of bilateral issues, we can be very, very close to membership in 2030. But I also think that the whole principle, the so-called regatta principle, that was the more favored approach by countries that see themselves as leading the way, which is very problematic today to say that Serbia and Montenegro are leading the way in European integration of the Western Balkans. If we see the return of en bloc principle, which is integrating Western Balkans as a whole with one ambitious swoop, then I can imagine that 2030 will be, we will be, I mean, if in 2030 we are not members of the EU, I don't think that there will be, any enthusiasm left. I would not recommend to my country to be enthusiastic anymore about enlargement, because Enlargement, you know, it is a process. A French colleague, and the French have a way of explaining this. He told me, you know, it's like a love affair. I mean, there is a, you know, you invest in this relationship. And if there is no return of a certain investment, you know, after passage of time, I think it's only reasonable that people tend to cool off. And the time is really, I really have said it on numerous occasions, and I think we all agree, is the most expensive commodity. We've been in this process for 2 decades now, and people need results. I don't even have to mention this to my colleague from Kosovo, who mentioned visa liberalization, rightfully so. In Serbia today, the 2009 visa liberalization is seen as the most concrete achievement of the European integration process that touched each and every citizen. This happened 12 years ago. So something needs to be done, and needs to be done quickly. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We now have a comment from Mr. Nora Staničić.
I wanted to comment on the issue of whether bureaucracies versus meritocracy. And Professor Židanešek, I would very respectfully disagree, because I think you have to understand that bureaucracy is actually the official entrance of meritocracy in policy making and decision making positions. Without this official entrance called bureaucracy, meritocrats never will be of decision making positions in the European Union. And otherwise, these positions will be taken by 2 principles: simply political appointments and appointees, and domination on national principle by dominating nations. So I'm speaking this from as an insider, from knowing how the institutions function. In the best case scenario, people are recruited and appointed simply based on meritocracy and based on rigid tests in various rounds, interviews, project presentations, and being able to communicate and work in at least 3 languages. In an ideal world, that's actually to be commended. So I would very respectfully disagree.
Yes.
One very brief comment, without at all getting into the heart of the matter, because I'm Bulgarian by origin, but I just wanted to say a lot of issues which are presented as kind of issues of European dimensions or European problems are actually coming straight from national political agenda, from domestic political agenda.
Thank you very much, Professor Židanšek. Would you like to very briefly answer?
First, thank you for your comment, which is interesting. And yes, it's true, there are different levels in European Commission. So there are like entry levels or these typical jobs where you have very high entry level requirements. And then there are jobs like European commissioners, which have a little lower entry job requirements. And there you just have to have 1 person from each country. And that distribution is very often not ideal. If I look at Slovenian cases, or maybe some other countries are probably very similar, these choices are not optimal, and Europe would actually be much stronger if it had a more representative leadership. I'm not sure how to do it. However, I believe that this meritocracy should be not only for the entry-level positions, but also for the highest level positions in European Union. So that is just my brief comment. And otherwise, of course, I think we agree more than you think. However, I believe that this is a strong challenge, particularly because Europe has to compete with the United States and China, who are actually doing it a little differently. The organizational culture in some Google is completely different. They set up what they are going to do next half a year. They already do it. In European Union, it takes a couple of years before you can decide what to do, and then it takes more and more time. So for example, if you want to have a European project, it takes 2 years to prepare it. And by that time, the United States are actually ahead of us already. The Chinese do the same. So we are too slow. So that's my main point, that we are too slow and we need to make European Union more efficient. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we have a question from Professor Trensky.
Thank you. Thank you for all the participants for their lectures. My question is in the same line with Lady Semela Sancic to Professor Zidanšek, in the same line. It seems that he messed up something with the definition of bureaucracy. He forgot to take a note about what Max Weber wrote 100 years ago about it. And regardless of the fact that Max Weber is already dead for 100 years, his name is used for the most prestigious scholarship of the European University Institute in Florence, which is leading university in the world together with Harvard. And if his name is relevant for such an institution, so therefore I think that good old definition posted by Weber 100 years ago are still valid for bureaucracy. In other words, whatever you described about meritocracy is a type of bureaucracy. So you take a look about it. Thanks, that's everything.
Would you like to comment, Professor Zidanšek?
I believe we agree more than we disagree. However, my main point is that European Union is not flexible enough for the contemporary world, and it needs to improve. Otherwise, everybody else is going to go ahead. So European processes in Brussels have to improve and get ahead to the 21st century. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think with this, do we have any questions on Zoom? No, I don't think so. I don't see any hand signs. Okay, so once again, thank you to our panelists. Thank you for your very interesting contributions. This has been recorded and will be used with your permission in different ways. We'll get back to you on that. Thank you also all of you for your questions and comments. I hope that at some next conference we'll all be in the same room and not here like this and in this virtual conference model that we've been doing for too many years now. And just as a last thought, I hope that in 2030 we're all in the European Union. Those of us who are already in, that we don't get out, and those of us who are not yet in, that they finally get in. And with that, I wish you a good evening and good night, and see you tomorrow.
Thank you. All the best.
Bye.
Thank you.